cool. So, functions. The truth of the matter is you've been using functions this whole time. Print is a function. Tuple is a function, this part, right? Everything that's been green, basically, except for stuff inside of our structures, has been a function. Sorted, type, these are all functions. And what they do is they take some parameters, they take some stuff, because if I just did print like this and ran it, nothing happens, right? It doesn't do anything. But we've been using functions this whole time. And a function usually will look like some func, and that's how we make the function go. We say, hey, do something. And that's just perfectly fine. But you can actually make your own. So the beauty of something like print is we can just use that same thing rather than knowing all of the stuff that goes in the background, the magic part of how Python changes from saying print to goes to 0 and 1s. Rather than knowing all that stuff, we can just say, hey, print, and it just does something for us. It's like a magic tool, right? And if you want to look at how exactly that's all put together, I can show you the very ridiculous and long CPython compiler that actually does that homework for us. But the beauty of this is we don't have to know that. We can just use the tools without understanding. This is kind of like driving a car without understanding all of the way the car works. You can just use it. And it's really, really nice to be able to do that, because we would take a really long time to learn to drive if you had to take a test on combustion engines or electric batteries, right? So that's the nice part about functions. But you can actually make your own, and you can use them over and over again. And so that's what we're going to do here. The first one I'm going to do is we're going to have a user-defined function. And so what we'll say here is we're going to say define, right? That says I am defining a function. So define, say hello, okay? And I put these parentheses here, and then I'm going to use a colon. And we're not going to worry about what goes in the parentheses just yet. We'll learn about that soon. But all we're going to make our function do, right? And notice we get on a new tab on our next line, kind of like our for loops and if statements are in a new tab. This is the body of the function. And we're going to say return, this is a new word. I know this is a lot, but you'll be okay. We're going to return hello world. And now when I run this code, absolutely nothing happens. Brandon, this is useless. This is a foolish endeavor. It's not a foolish endeavor, I promise. So say hello. We have our function. We have this stuff. But right now, we haven't turned our machine on. We haven't used it, right? And unlike the physical world, we can copy and use this machine over and over and over again at absolutely no cost. We don't need to have space in our house or anything else like that. We can use it over and over again, and it will do the same thing over and over again, which is often very useful. Let's see. How will we end up doing this? We've already messed around with this a little bit. So showing the function call in memory. And so now when I say print, say hello, we also do not get anything useful whatsoever. So this is where the function, right? And this is telling us what data type it is, right? It's saying that we have a function. It's called say hello, and it's at this location in your memory, and that's in hexadecimal. Don't worry about what that means. But that's like the mailing address inside your computer of where this function lives, which is neat. But what we want to do is we actually want to use this code. So rather than using that, we're going to say we're going to do what's called calling the function. That is a vocabulary word I will use repeatedly. I will say you didn't call it correctly, or you need to call the function. This is what I mean by that, right? And the way we do this would be say hello, like that. When we add those parentheses, then it actually does something, right? But nothing came out. Oh, actually it did. So we have our output here, and that's fine and well. But we want to be able to see it like a print statement here. So I'm going to end up printing say hello. And then it will spit that out with the rest of our print stuff. What's this return thing? Why can't I just say print hello world? And you could. You could just, print hello world. We would have some issues, I think, if we end up printing prints. So it doesn't end up returning anything. So we're just going to say hello here. That's just fine. But here's what we're going to end up doing. And there's a reason for why that happened, but it's a little complicated. Here's what we're going to do. What's cool with this is I can actually copy paste this now. And now it says it a whole bunch of times, right? Which can be really useful, especially because you can write a very ornate piece of code as the body of a function and then run it multiple times, right? Especially for us with data, you might want to say, I'm going to write a piece of code that every time that my database has a column, right, that has missing values, right, null values or none values or non-applicable values or whatever, I want to do the same thing every time. And so then I'll just be able to loop over it and say, if I have a null value, run this function that changes the data in some way and inserts that in. That's very useful. We'll see lots of functions. It will become very clear very quickly why this is so useful. Another thing you could do is, well, I'm going to show you what returning really means, and why it ends up being useful. So the difference between returning and printing. So let's say that I'm going to be add 2 here, and we're going to add return 4 plus 5. So I got our 2 numbers here. Well, let's say add values here. Okay. So I can print add values. That's not how I used. This is snake case, by the way, where we use the underscores. Camel case is the one that uses the upper cases, and it's usually what I end up using, but that's okay. This should be interesting. It seems to remember what say hello does, which I think is fascinating. But now we've got add values. We've got that there, and that's fine. So now I run this. There we go. We'll just clear that out so you can see better. When I run add values, it does, in fact, add 4 plus 5. But if I wanted to add to, well, okay, we'll actually go back here. Plus 2. And this will also work out just fine. We can add numbers to whatever that returns, which is okay. We start running into some more problems when, oh man, I gotta think about this a little bit. Make it really obvious. Give me a second, let me think. Okay, just kidding, I lied. We're going to get more into this later. You will understand the difference between return and print. Essentially, printing only just like makes stuff appear here. When you're using this, you can actually use those values in other places very easily. You can pass in other stuff, but that's big picture programming concepts, and we're not quite ready for that yet. I will show you more examples and make it clear as we go. For example, you don't understand parameters, which is how I was going to explain part of this solution. So, what we'll do, oh, there we go. All right, accepting parameters. So the order matters. A variable, ooh, wrong thing there. A variable, that's called a decorator, by the way, and you probably will never have to interact with that as a data analyst. A variable can be of any type of object. So I'm going to say def print full name. And we're going to put in here first name and last name, right? Oops. And we're going to return an F string that says hello, first name, last name, right? Finish that off there. And so now I'm going to print out print full name, and I'm going to pass in Brandon A. Paul. And there you go. Hello, Brandon A. Paul. But you might be wondering, you might say, hey, wait a second, wouldn't it be cool if you put in other stuff, right? So I'm going to print the same thing, print full name, but instead I'm going to pass in Lydia Fitzwilliam. Woo. Right? And so there we go. There's me and my wife's names. So there you go. So you got Brandon A. Paul and Lydia Fitzwilliam. That's just fine. Cool beans. We can also kind of assert what's going to happen here. We also switch these, so I can just say last here instead. Only if I spell it right. Last name. Sure enough, then it switches them around. You also don't have to use every one of them. APOL is kind of weird, but you could if you wanted to, I guess. And then last thing we can do is I'm going to print full name, and I'm going to specifically say last name equals what we're going to do, Carter. First name equals Joel. And sure enough, that ends up playing out. We've got the last name and the first name, even though these come in a different order. But you'll notice that that order does matter, that whatever's first goes into that first value. This goes in the second one. And essentially what's happening in the background here, let me see if I can, I can draw. I don't know if this will, yeah. What's happening in the background here is we are going to be setting, wow, cool. I hope this isn't permanent. But anyways, what's happening in the background is we're actually connecting this with this. So I am actually making a temporary variable called last, wow, this is a mess, name. I don't like this at all. Done, go away. Great. In the background, what's happening here is the code is essentially saying last name equals APOL, right? And that's happening behind the scenes, so we don't have to worry about that. But it's setting that temporarily inside the function, and it's using that. And so you got to think about that last name is a variable, and we're just setting it equal to this for the duration of the function. Once the function ends, it doesn't matter. And so the next time I run that function, Fitzwilliam becomes last name, and it overwrites that, and it's not an issue. So that should help a little bit with understanding parameters and what they do. Again, we're just setting this variable to APOL so that when I use that variable, when I set last name, it's the same as if I were literally setting, last name equals APOL, and then just doing that over and over again, and overwriting it repeatedly. So interesting to think about, kind of some cool stuff. Default parameters. You can actually set parameters to default to something, but you can overwrite them if you'd like to. And again, this looks very much like setting a variable in your code. So def print agent name. We're going to say, we're going to say first name and last name, but this time we're going to set it just like we're setting a variable, bond, right? And so I'm going to say return f string. The name is first name. And now, if that works out, I can say print agent name, and I'm just going to put in just James. And you might be thinking, wait a second, but there's two variables here, right? Will it run if I haven't declared it, right? And if I didn't have, we'll just actually do this first, okay? And this will throw in error. Type error. It says print agent name is missing one required positional argument, last name. It's saying you didn't give me a last name. So if I were to give bond here, then it's just fine. But I don't want that there. I want it to be the default. No. And now it works just fine. But I can also overwrite it this way, right? So if you actually do pass something into that variable, then that's important. One other thing that's really important to notice here, is default parameters need to be after non-default parameters. Okay, so that works out. And also, I'm going to throw in a little "don't do this, please" example, because it's not the best way to do things, right? So let's go ahead and uncomment this. This will run. I think this will run. Let me comment this part out. Yeah. So non-default argument follows default argument. It will break. So please don't do this. this up here is the right way to do things. We'll just leave that there. Leave that in, and obviously now you can write this, and that is okay. So, yeah, and obviously we're using first name here to overwrite what first name is, and that's just not good. It's just spooky. Making an argument optional, just set it to an empty string. So I'll just copy paste this here. I think we're getting the idea. You can type along if you'd like. But print horse name first, middle equals nothing, and last equals Ed. So now if I'm only passing in Ed, this should come, or for Mr., it should come out as hello, Mr. Ed. Just be aware that you might end up with an extra space there if you do something like this. And so maybe using if-else statements would be a better way of sorting out how many spaces to put in here. And there's probably some other ways to get around that. Keyword arguments, this is a little tricky. Okay, we're not actually going to get into this too much. Yeah, we're going to skip that one. That's not something you should ever have to work with as a data analyst. All right, cool. So that should be about time. We're at about 16 minutes, so we'll call that. And then we'll get to scope and our creating start, step, stop function. And that should be just fine. And I'll see you in the next lecture.